of the little things I love in The Lord of the Rings is a tiny gesture made by Gimli, but it leads into a very large question, which I don't think has ever truly been asked before, about a certain mountain. It occurs after the Fellowship have left Moria. We have just been through Gandalf's tragic encounter with the Balrog, and Tolkien sets the scene for us as follows. They rose and looked about them. Northward, the dale ran up into a glen of shadows between two great arms of the mountains, above which 3 white peaks were shining: Celebdil, Finuethal, Caradhras, the Mountains of Moria. At the head of the glen, a torrent flowed like a white lace over an endless ladder of short falls, and a mist of foam hung in the air about the mountain's feet. "Yonder is the Dimril Stair," said Aragorn, pointing to the falls. "Down the deep cloven way that climbs beside the torrent we should have come, if fortune had been kinder." "Or Caradhras less cruel," said Gimli. "There he stands, smiling in the sun." He shook his fist at the furthest of the snow-capped peaks and turned away. And it's that shaking of his fist that I love. It's more than just defiance. It's frustration, it's anger, it's contempt, it's sadness, all in a simple gesture. It's a much different Gimli on this side of the mountains than we got before. On the western side of the Misty Mountains, his view is one of reverence. "I need no map," said Gimli, who had come up with Legolas, and was gazing out before him with a strange light in his deep eyes. "There is the land where our fathers worked of old, and we have wrought the image of those mountains into many works of metal and of stone, and into many songs and tales. They stand tall in our dreams, Baraz, Zirak, Shathur. Only once before have I seen them from afar in waking life, but I know them and their names, for under them lies Khazad-dum, the Dwarodelf, that is now called the Black Pit, Moria in the Elvish tongue. Yonder stands Barazinbar, the Redhorn, cruel Caradhras, and beyond him are Silvertine and Cloudyhead, Celebdil the White, and Finuethal the Grey, that we call zirak-zigil and Bunda-shathur. These mountains are important to the dwarves, figuring in artwork both of the physical kind, carvings, etchings, and the like, and in story and song. They are objects of, if not worship, then of deep adoration. And yet, the cruelty of the mountains, or specifically one mountain, is felt so strongly that all of that goes out the window, and Gimli shakes his fist at it, ready to do battle if he could, anything to show how offended he is at what the mountain has done. And what has the mountain done, Caradhras the Cruel? That's a tough question, but not because we don't know what has been done. That is explained in great detail in the text. The company encounters Caradhras because they need to cross the Misty Mountains. And from this point, this is a perfect place to do it. It even has a name, the Redhorn Gate, or Redhorn Pass, which lies under the sides of Caradhras. This is the way to get over, and, although the company doesn't know it, but it was part of Gandalf's plan, to get to Lothlorien. From here, they make their ascent. The text tells us. The company set out again, with good speed at first, but soon their way became steep and difficult. The twisting and climbing road had in many places almost disappeared, and was blocked with many fallen stones. The night grew deadly dark under great clouds. A bitter wind swirled along the rocks. By midnight they had climbed to the knees of the great mountains. The narrow path now wound under a sheer wall of cliffs to the left, above which the grim flanks of Caradhras towered up invisible in the gloom. On the right was a gulf of darkness, where the land fell suddenly into a deep ravine. Then it starts to snow, fast and hard. "I knew the risk of snow," says Aragorn, "though it seldom falls heavily so far south, save high up in the mountains. But we are not high yet. We are still far down, where the paths are usually open all winter." They halt, and the wind dies down, and the snow stops. Almost. But as soon as they start again, The storm returned with fresh fury. The wind whistled, and the snow became a blinding blizzard. They are forced to stop again as the snow is piling up, and the wind merciless. But that's not all. Stones began to fall from the mountainside, whistling over their heads, or crashing on the path beside them. Every now and again, they heard a dull rumble as a great boulder rolled down from hidden heights above. As if that weren't enough, they heard eerie noises in the darkness round them. It may have been only a trick of the wind in the cracks and gullies of the rocky wall, but the sounds were those of shrill cries and wild howls of laughter. They can go no further and gather together as close to the cliff as they can. But eddying blasts swirled round them from every side, and the snow flowed down in ever denser clouds. This will be the death of the halflings, declares Boromir, and he's not wrong. But even a mouthful of Mirivor, the cordial of Imladris, and a fire generated by Gandalf are not enough. Gimli looked up and shook his head. "Caradhras has not forgotten us," he said. "He has more snow to fling at us if we go on." They decide to go back, but the snow is murderously high, and only the strength of Aragorn and Boromir allow them to literally dig their way free. But not before they come to the greatest wind drift of all, more than twice the height of Boromir. They manage to break through, and Gimli sums it up quite clearly. "It was no ordinary storm. It is the will of Caradhras. He does not love elves and dwarves, and that drift was laid to cut off our escape." They make it down and through the drift, but even there they aren't safe. Hardly had Frodo touched the ground, after being carried by Aragorn, when with a deep rumble they rolled down a fall of stones and slithering snow. The spray of it half blinded the company as they crouched against the cliff, and when the air cleared again, they saw that the path was blocked behind them. "Enough! Enough!" cried Gimli. "We are departing as quickly as we may!" And indeed, with that last stroke, the malice of the mountain seemed to be expended, as if Caradhras was satisfied that the invaders had been beaten off and would not dare to return. And the personification of the mountain continues with the last words of that chapter. Caradhras had defeated them. And so, this is the prelude to everything that happens before Gimli shakes his fist. There's the encounter with the Watcher in the Water, and the trip through Moria, which nearly takes a life or two, specifically Frodo, who would have been done for but for his mithril coat, and then finally the loss of Gandalf. So it makes a kind of sense for Gimli to do what he does and say what he says, wishing Caradhras had been less cruel. But in looking at this, I keep coming back to the question: when, apart from this very moment, was Caradhras ever truly cruel? Gimli says, Caradhras was called the Cruel and had an ill name long years ago, when rumor of Sauron had not been heard in these lands. Specifically, he is talking about the time way back in the First Age, thousands of years ago, when Durin the First comes here and names the nameless hills and dells. But Durin does not name Caradhras cruel. That's not what the word Caradhras means. It means red horn. It's from the Elvish or Sindarin language, Carad meaning red, and Ras meaning horn. By the way, the DH in Tolkien is pronounced th, so the proper pronunciation of Caradhras is just that, Caradhras. But the point is, it doesn't mean cruel. Likewise, its other name, its Dwarvish or Khuzdul name, is Barazinbar, and that also means red horn. Baraz, red, and Inbar, horn. It's the same with the other mountains, Celebdil and Fenuithal, Zirak-zigil and Bundashathur. They mean what they are in the common tongue, Silvertine and Cloudyhead. So, Caradhras doesn't seem to have been cruel from the outset. In fact, it could be argued that it never was. Because this spot is, and has always been, a way to get over the Misty Mountains. And we know this from all of the other references to Caradhras, or the Red Horn Gate, in the text that we encounter. We've already had one, Before the company sets out from Rivendell, we learn of the scouts. Many had gone east and south, and some of these had crossed the mountains and entered Mirkwood, while others had climbed the paths at the sources of the Gladden River, and had come down into Wilderland and over the Gladden Fields, and so at length had reached the old home of Radagast at Rosgobel. Radagast was not there, and they had returned over the high pass that was called the Redhorn Gate. On the way up, Aragorn said, "But we are not high yet. We are still far down, where the paths are usually open all the winter." So he expects to pass here. Much, much later, after the ring has been destroyed and everyone is heading home, we read, "Soon Celeborn and Galadriel and their folk would turn eastward, and so pass by the Redhorn Gate, and down the Dimrill Stair to the Silverlode, and to their own country," which was precisely the plan Gandalf had had. Reading on into the appendices, and in the section on Durin's folk, we learn about Thror, grandfather to Thorin Oakenshield, about 3rd Age 2799. He was a little crazed, perhaps with age and misfortune, and long brooding on the splendor of Moria in his forefathers' days. Or the ring, it may be, was turning to evil now that its master was awake, driving him to folly and destruction. From Dunland, where he was then dwelling, he went north with Nar, and they crossed the Redhorn Pass and came down into Azanulbazar. And finally, in the Tale of Years, we discover that in 3rd Age, circa 1150, the Stores, that strain of hobbitry which Diegol and Smeagol are from, come over the Redhorn Pass and move to the Angle, or to Dunland. Taking our reading even further into Unfinished Tales, we learn about the disaster of the Gladden Fields, where Isildur was killed and the ring fell into the Anduin. The text tells us, "The orcs of the mountains were stiffened and commanded by grim servants of Barad-dûr, sent out long before to watch the passes." Christopher Tolkien's footnote to this reads, "There can be no doubt that Sauron, well informed of the alliance, the last alliance of elves and men, had sent out such orc troops of the Red Eye as he could spare, to do what they could to harry any forces that attempted to shorten their road by crossing the mountains. In the event, the main might of Gil-galad, together with Isildur and part of the men of Arnor, had come over the passes of Imladris and Caradhras, and the orcs were dismayed and hid themselves." So, at no time has Caradhras shown itself to be cruel. In fact, just the opposite. It's letting everyone go through. I mean, the pass would not exist here if it were truly cruel, now would it? Now, there is one instance where a cruel thing definitely happens in this area, and this is also revealed in the appendices. First, we learn that in 3rd Age, circa 2480, orcs begin to make secret strongholds in the Misty Mountains, so as to bar all the passes into Eriador. Sauron begins to people Moria with his creatures. Then, in 2509, Celebrian, wife of Elrond, was journeying to Lorien, when she was waylaid in the Redhorn Pass, and her escort scattered by the sudden assault of the orcs. She was seized and carried off. She was pursued and rescued by Elladan and Elrohir, her sons, but not before she had suffered torment and received a poison wound. And while this is pretty cruel, it has nothing to do with the mountain itself. All the cruelty comes from the orcs of Moria, not Caradhras. So, why is it called cruel? Apart from the company trying to cross the Misty Mountains, in all of the Legendarium, this is the only instance where a cruel thing happens. But I hardly think that dwarves would care too much if an elf lady was tormented by orcs, so much so that they would name the area Cruel. And again, we learn from Gimli that Caradhras was called the Cruel and had an ill name long years ago. So the Cruel was in place well before the Celebrian incident. Now, in Middle-earth, there's certainly nothing odd in an inanimate object having a kind of sentience, of being able to feel or be something. Likewise, Aragorn notes, "There are many evil and unfriendly things in the world that have little love for those that go on two legs." And in the Silmarillion, we learn of the origin of these mountains, the Mountains of Mist, or Hithyglir. But the mountains were the Hithyglir, the towers of mist upon the borders of Eriador. Yet they were taller and more terrible in those days, and were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. So, the Misty Mountains were created by Melkor, the true Dark Lord of whom Sauron was but a servant? Could there be an inherent evil in the entire mountain range, and Caradhras is the example? And could it be that the mountain didn't like that Durin picked this spot to establish his dwelling in, that being khazad-dum? Well, it's hardly likely, since the other mountains, Celebdil and Fenuithal, didn't seem to mind, because remember that khazad-dum is under all of them, which is why the dwarves honor all of them in song and art. And again, Caradhras has never shown itself to be cruel, especially to dwarves or to elves, as Gimli had indicated. He does not love elves and dwarves. Since Caradhras does nothing to the scouts from Rivendell, nor to Thror back when he was going across, nor does it do anything to Gil-galad and Isildur and all those others who crossed over to assault Sauron as part of the Last Alliance. Seems like if it was truly evil, probably that would have been the time to intervene, even if it wasn't in league with Sauron. In fact, the only time it is actually cruel is when it hinders the company from getting across. But that, to me, continues to show its lack of cruelty. Since when you look at what goes on, the mountain doesn't appear to be trying to kill the company, just to keep them from getting across. Remember, when they first start up, we read, "Soon their way became steep and difficult. The twisting and climbing road had in many places almost disappeared, and was blocked with many fallen stones." So the stones have already fallen. A first sign, perhaps, of its trying to tell the company, don't cross here. Yet the company pushes on, until the weather and more rocks keep them from continuing. But if it were truly cruel, it would not have dropped anything ahead of time. It would have waited until they were deep into the pass, and then let loose its boulders and bad weather, and really stop them flat. Literally. Like in any ambush, you don't shoot the first soldier to cross into the space. You let several go through, letting them think it's fine, and then you start shooting. So the cruelty as seen here is not to kill, but to prevent passage. But why? Why would the mountain care? Why would anyone care? Now, there's a lot of debate as to why Caradhras behaves the way it does. Is it purely sentient? Hates being trespassed upon and reacts? This seems to be Gimli's feeling. It was no ordinary storm. It is the will of Caradhras. But again, the question is, why would Caradhras all of a sudden do it? One idea which I have suspected for a while, but have since rejected, is the idea of the ring drawing evil things to it, which would explain why the Watcher in the Water reaches out for Frodo first, for example. Likewise, the Barrow-wight, the Black Riders, who we are explicitly told are drawn to the ring. Perhaps even the Balrog. But if that's the case here, we have to assume that A, Caradhras is inherently evil to begin with, as those other things certainly are, and B, it doesn't really know how to kill people since, as noted, it should have waited for its chance to drop the stones on everyone, not done it ahead of time. The other potential candidates for making Caradhras behave the way it does are Sauron and Saruman. Boromir thinks it's Sauron, believing it a contrivance of the enemy, and he reveals that they say in Gondor that he, Sauron, can govern storms in the Mountains of Shadow. He has strange powers and many allies. Gimli then questions the length of Sauron's arm that he can reach out from Mordor all the way here, bringing storms down on them, to which Gandalf notes, his arm has grown long. But since Saruman is closer, I think he is a more likely candidate. The movie makes that pretty clear, but the text isn't quite so definitive. Still, if we can presume that Caradhras only wants to prevent passage through the Redhorn Gate and not to kill the company, we have to ask what's the reason for that. Well, number one, if Sauron suspects the company has the ring, and I think it's a pretty fair bet that he does, having them buried under rocks and snow isn't the best idea, especially if you want the ring yourself. We're talking a lot of digging to get at it. But if you prevent them from crossing, they have no choice, presumably, but to head further south toward the Gap of Rohan and Isengard, where Sauron is. Precisely what Gandalf had warned Boromir that they don't want to do. So, is it Caradhras acting on its own? Or is it Sauron acting upon the mountain itself, inciting its natural hatred of things that walk on two legs? Or is it Sauron just bringing this down upon the company himself, since Caradhras really doesn't have any natural hatred? Or is it Sauron acting upon Saruman, who is acting upon the mountain? It keeps coming back to that cruel factor. Why is Caradhras called cruel? Personally, I think it's just something that got applied to the mountain from the very beginning and has stuck, without anyone realizing either why or that it isn't entirely accurate. Because I think it's as simple as the description we get as the company is ascending. On the third morning, Caradhras rose before them, a mighty peak, tipped with snow like silver, but with sheer naked sides, dull red as if stained with blood. Who is to say that Durin the First didn't see the same sight as that? He must have seen some kind of a red, since he named the mountain Redhorn. In a storytelling sense, a legendary sense, it's not too far to go from red just existing as a color of stone to being the color of blood. And from there, with many, many centuries to fill in the gaps, and many storytellers adding to the legends, it's really not far for that blood to become cruelly spilt, with the mountain always to blame. When in reality, the mountain was never cruel at all, just of an unfortunate color. In essence, I think Caradhras has gotten a bad rap over the millennia, but Gimli certainly doesn't realize that, and shakes his fist at it because that's what he feels. But he's doing so for all the wrong reasons. But shake it he does, and that fist of his is one of the little things I love in The Lord of the Rings. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful day.